Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the Secret City Salon. Before we get started, I want to ask everyone to please turn off your video and please turn off your mic. We will have a couple moments during the presentation where we'll ask you to come back on and we'll have some conversation and some discussion. But if you'll keep your video and your mic off, otherwise, that would be most helpful to please keep your video and mic off. So welcome. Hi, I'm Chris Wells. I'm the founder and artistic director of The Secret City, co-founder along with my now husband, Bobby Lucy, who will be tonight's featured artist. I'm going to introduce him in just a minute. I just want to get some announcements out to you. First, I want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members. If you're supporting the work of the Secret City through our Patreon, thank you so much. Membership is providing a lifeline for our organization right now. So members and donors, thank you so much. And to those of you who have purchased tickets to be here this evening, thank you so much for your support. A healthy portion of all ticket sales go directly to the salon artists. So one of the ideas behind these salons is that we want to connect artists to community and also give artists an opportunity to make some money. So thank you for supporting that mission. Another thing, we will have a tip jar up for Bobby if you feel inspired to throw Bobby some cash during the event. Karen will put up Bobby's tip jar. There it is. And that will recur if you would like to use that. Use those links. And speaking of Karen, Karen Schleifer is here. Karen is our online producer and coordinator and there she is. Hi, Karen. Hi. Making the event work beautifully and flow. And thank you so much, Karen. So just a few announcements. I want to let you know our next salon date, which is December 17th, and our guest will be Maya Camille. If you were at our last service, Maya is a really wonderful singer-songwriter, currently based in Israel. We love her very much, and she's a great talent. And so plan on joining us December 17th for our next salon. Our next monthly service will be November 29th. That's our Sunday service at 2 p.m. Sunday afternoon Eastern, and that is free for all members. We would love to have you for that. And then we have our Solstice service. We have a lot coming up. Our Winter Solstice service, which will be a fundraiser this year for the Secret City. That's Sunday, December 20th at 7:30 p.m. The Secret City Daily is every weekday, 12 p.m. Eastern, streaming on our Facebook and Instagram pages. We would love to have you. It's a really beautiful community. And lastly, we've just started having a weekly virtual dance during the radio show that I host every Monday night, 10 p.m. Eastern to midnight. We're having a blast. So if you want to come dance with us, watch for the link for that. It's really fun. Everybody gathers on Zoom, and I put together a really great playlist, and we just dance our little hearts out for 2 hours every Monday night. Okay, that's all the programming that's coming up. But most importantly, the programming that is here right now. You all know Bobby Lucy is a very important person to me. He's my husband, the person I spend my life with. I'm very privileged and happy and blessed to share my life with him. And in addition to being an extraordinary person, he is a singular talent and a wonderful visual artist and truly gifted. And I'm thrilled to introduce him and to have him share his work with all of us this way. I think you're in for a real treat. Bobby's going to share images from the 4 primary stages of his career, and he's going to talk us through those. So the evening will be in quarters, and at the end of each quarter, we'll have about a 5-minute chance to have conversation and for people to chat with Bobby and come in on camera and turn their mics on. And if you have questions or comments, we'll take those at the end of each section. Okay, without any further ado, oh, and please feel free to use the chat liberally if you want to say things, comment, ask questions in there. We'll monitor the chat as well. Okay, ladies, gentlemen, and the rest of you, Bobby Lucy. You hear Bobby?
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good.
So glad you're here. I'm going to turn off. Are you ready to take it away?
Sure.
Great. Here's Bobby Lucy.
All right. Can you all see me? I can't. I don't see my own face. Oh, there I am. So thank you so much for coming and joining me here. I feel really honored that you all are going to come give me a little time to tell my story. I've been painting for over 30 years, and I put together some slides as a sort of overview. There's probably about 10 images for every one that I show that I'm not showing, but I'm going to try to give you a sort of broad story of what I've done in these years as a painter. I grew up in St. Louis, and I left for college and went to Northwestern, and my sophomore year, I realized that I wanted to be a painter. So I transferred to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, I was in Evanston, Illinois, and downtown is about 30 minutes away, but it was a very long ways away in terms of a change in my life. And that really began my career. And so I transferred to the Art Institute, and I started painting. And can we show the first slide?
Yes, give me 1 second.
Thank y'all.
You're welcome. Sorry, I got some fanciness here for you.
Chicago, yeah. So I moved downtown, and I lived in a dorm that was right near the school, and was suddenly like in downtown life art school, which was a different thing. But I'm starting the show with a self-portrait. I did a lot of self-portraits at the beginning. Well, I started painting, and I was doing a lot of abstraction, and I was trying on a lot of different things. And I was in a few years into my school when I did this. This is, I think, maybe my first or second self-portrait. And I was in an advanced painting class, and I don't have an image of it, but I painted a bagel with cream cheese that I brought up for lunch. And that was a still life. And I realized, and then I did this self-portrait, and I started realizing that I really connected when I was looking at something, and so, as opposed to just painting something out of my imagination, even though there are elements of that throughout my work. And I wanted to start with a self-portrait because my entire painting career is really, painting for me is a form of self-investigation. I think every painting is really a self-portrait, even if it's not, if you know what I mean. It's revealing something about myself to myself, sometimes about my unconscious, about the state of mind I'm in. This first painting is revealing because it's the glove is a very direct reference to De Chirico. I was very interested in the surrealists, especially at the beginning of my career. You can go to the next slide. One of the great things about being in the Chicago Art Institute is that I was able to have access to the museum, and just the most important part of my education was really looking at art and looking at painting. And this is one of my first couple still lifes. When I say that, it's like, this is when I really started to feel connected to my work, where I sort of started the conversation that I'm still in now, 30 years later, of observational painting. The late 80s, the mid 80s, I was sort of on a wave of new figurative painters, we sort of had abstract expressionism, and figure painting had really gone out of style. And so I was part of a new wave of people who were starting to be interested in painting images again, painting representational paintings. You can go to the next slide. And my first sort of group of paintings, I did a lot of self-portraits, and I included a lot of masks, and I would have a still life and a self-portrait or a still life. There was these sort of setups. You can go to the next slide. And I want to introduce early on this portrait of Dennis, Adrian, and Richard Bourne, who were central to my life in Chicago. I can't talk about my career in Chicago without sort of first going to them. They lived in a two-story apartment that was just wall-to-wall art, and it really changed my life the moment I walked into their apartment. Dennis on the left was my teacher, and Richard on the right was a curator of the Smart Museum at the University of Chicago. You can go to the next slide. And Dennis became a hugely important influence in my life for the next 15 years. He was a critic and a teacher, art historian, collector, and the center of a really interesting social group of people in Chicago: artists, collectors, curators, he was sort of the nucleus of it all. And I was really privileged to be in a really exciting group of people, and we went to a lot of openings, and we drank a lot of champagne and talked about painting and art and listened to music, and I was exposed to just so much that I had never known before. Next slide. Dennis also was from Oregon, and he would go, as he was a teacher, he would spend his summers in Oregon, and he invited people to come and paint there. And this is one of my early landscapes. I ended up going to Oregon for the entire summer for the whole time I lived in Chicago. So I went for 10 summers. So next slide. This is another early-ish one. And I would go and I would take my canvases and stretch them and take them out on the trails with my lunch and my umbrella. And I started this rhythm that started having summers painting in Oregon, and then coming back to Oregon and painting. Next slide. Here's Richard again with, I did a lot of paintings in paintings. I sort of enjoyed that metaphysical aspect of a painting inside a painting of a painting, and what is that, which is again related to the surrealist, especially Magritte. I was sort of referencing one of my very favorite painters, especially at that time. Next slide. So I would paint in Oregon and do landscapes, and then come back, and I was sort of doing these other sort of surrealist paintings. This is a pretty big 4x5 foot painting that I did using still life objects and taking bits of older paintings, and that levitating dog is my Goggy, was sort of my childhood stuffed animal. Next slide. This is all sort of mid to late 80s, and for those of you that lived through that, AIDS was the big news, started to be very much in 1984 when I graduated from college. So I think I look back on some of these and I see this sort of the fear and anxiety, sort of sexual anxiety that was sort of in the air, especially for a gay man at that time. And then you can see the daytime, nighttime image of the landscape. That's another reference to Magritte. Next slide. But I would collect still life objects. You can go back, you missed one. There, yeah, back, next, there we go. And this painting is starting to be one of the paintings that was in my first show that I had when I was 29 years old at the Sonia Zaks Gallery. And these paintings, they're still lifes and they're a collection of objects, but I was definitely exploring my own psyche, my own unconscious, and as a surrealist taught me to sort of tap into my unconscious and they're poetic. They're not, there's no code that tells you the answers of what they were, but I can sort of see the landscape of my emotional life that was coming through in these paintings. Next slide. This painting is 5 by 5 feet, and it was sort of staged in my Chicago apartment. And it's one of the most ambitious things I had done to date. And I'm still kind of into it. It's also relating to Magritte and creating these situations that are just full of mystery. You see the figure behind the wall, the figure becomes the mask and the masks, and those little babies are taken from a Bernini sculpture that I adapted, and my armless hermaphrodite self-portrait there in the lower left. Next slide. So I also want to introduce Sylvia Slee, who was a very important person in this period of my life. She was a painter. She showed at my gallery in Chicago, though she was from New York. She was British, but she lived in New York with her husband, the British, whose portrait is there in the upper left. Lawrence Alloway was the first curator of the Guggenheim Museum. And Sylvia and I became friends. She was a figure painter, painted a lot of male nudes, and I modeled for her. And then after her husband died, I ended up traveling around, taking many, many trips all around the world with her to see museums and architecture. We went to Egypt, Europe, all around Europe. And my most favorite was to India. Next slide. And these are some paintings that were influenced by the travel that I did with Sylvia to India. This is called Pain. Next slide. And India kind of blew my mind open in terms of my painting, and really changed my painting. It changed my color. It changed, I saw for the first time that my sort of fastidiousness was expressed in these Indian miniatures, and I really related to them, and it sort of gave me a new sense of myself and my identity as a painter, and that there was this whole other art historical lineage that I related to very much. Next slide. So this painting is called God. It's both of these last two paintings are rather large. That last one is 5 by 4. This one is, I think, 5 feet by 4 feet too. And it's my take on a God. Next slide. So again, this sort of rhythm of painting these bigger, ambitious still lifes, and then going back to Oregon, and so these two strains of my painting were sort of developing simultaneously. Next slide. And my landscapes were getting more and more intense, taking more days out there each, and I was really developing my own style of painting landscape. And as you'll see, it's continued to be woven through all of my painting. Next slide. I got really interested in painting these sort of deep woods paintings, instead of just the ocean scenes and the views, I really enjoyed these deep woods, crumbling, decaying. This is a stump that sort of looks like a spaceship or some sort of something left behind from another culture. Next slide. And because it rains a lot in Oregon, I would paint things inside on the days that it rained when I couldn't paint outside. So I did a lot of Oregon paintings that were still lifes and self-portraits. Next. And as I kept painting, the paintings kept getting more and more detailed, and I was fascinated with how to, paint reflective things and shiny things and different textures. And this is looking out of the house that I was staying in, which then became my house later, which I bought and moved into when I moved to Oregon. Next slide. And just another couple of characters from my Chicago days. This is my friend Steve and Denise, and a portrait that I painted of them sitting in my my apartment in Chicago, and you can see some of the interior of that in the background. And when I started with Dennis, I end with Steve and Denise. They sort of helped me escape. After all, it became time for me to go, and they sort of assisted me in my next moving into my next chapter. Next slide. Another Oregon landscape. They also became bigger and more ambitious. Next slide. Next slide. And I don't know if this is the last painting that I did in Chicago, but it always feels like the last painting I did. It's called Blocked Passage. And I think I really felt at the end of something. I had had this incredible experience for all of my 20s. I was now in my early 30s and feeling sort of stifled by my social life and by the art world. And I had an opportunity to leave, to get this house that I mentioned in Oregon. And at the time, I didn't know I was leaving Chicago. I thought I would just go sort of half and half, but I realize now it was kind of it was just a transition. Let me look and see. I think that's, so yeah, this is the last slide that I have for Chicago. It was obviously a really pivotal, rich time for my development. There's a lot that I didn't show. I'd love to show you more, but that was sort of the range of images that I was exploring in that time. Hello.
Oh my God. It's so exciting, Bobby. It's so thrilling to see this work and hear you. I know there's a lot, and you're packing a lot in, which is also part of the excitement, but it's really marvelous. I want to encourage people, if you have a comment or a question, if you want to turn your video and mic on, we will have a little conversation here. Anything you want to know more about what you saw or heard, feel free to turn on your camera and join us for a minute or two before we dive into the next chapter of Bobby Lucy's career.
I meant to mention that I decided to divide this little talk into 4 sections because of the 4 places that I lived in my adult life. I lived in Chicago for 14 years or so, and then I moved to Oregon, and then I moved to New York City, where I met Chris, and then Chris and I moved to Woodstock. So those are 4 chapters.
Great. Let's take some questions and comments. Jill. Hi, Jill.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Bobby.
Hey.
Bobby, thanks for sharing. Those were so cool. I have a question about some of the still lives you were doing in those years.
Yeah.
How much did you kind of like agonize over choosing what objects to put there and how they would be interpreted and the meaning, and how much were you just kind of playing around with what you wanted to try to paint?
You know, collecting was one of my very favorite things to do. In Chicago, there's a lot of great junk stores, and that was just a favorite pastime. So the whole thing was very intuitive. Like, I would respond to objects and I wouldn't have to have a reason why. It's just like I'm drawn to something. And so I would collect, and I didn't have a lot of money. So I was collecting a lot of postcards and little objects, but they would amass around my house. And then one of my favorite things when I was setting these things up was that there would be something that sort of sparked an idea. And then it became a sort of dream of just choosing, going to these things in a very intuitive sort of dream space to set them up. And then they would sort of reveal themselves, and it would just, it's a really about just like, what does it feel like? And I wouldn't be like, oh, well, I want a hand with a thing. And it was very much intuitive, and I would get into a sort of internal space in creating them. And then the fascinating thing is often, months or 6 months later, I would have I would look back on it and see that there was this language that I was sort of communicating with myself, that there were these objects in its entirety, it sort of did express a certain thing or a certain feeling.
Awesome. Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you.
Great. Hi, Leah. You have a question?
You're muted.
You're muted, Leah. Maybe your mic's not working. We can't hear you.
I think the audio is disconnected, probably, Leah.
Leah, see if you can work on it. I've got another question from Helen. Let's take Helen's question and we'll give Leah a minute to see if the audio can get worked out. Helen says, are you familiar with Emily Carr's work? Was she an influence?
Is she one of the Canadian 7?
Group of 7, yeah.
Group of 7, yeah. I know a little bit about her, and I've actually gotten to know that Group of 7 more as I've gotten older, and I love their work, and I'm glad to have that connection to them. But they weren't a huge influence at the beginning because I didn't really know much about them. But every time I've seen any example of their work, I've been drawn to it. Marston Hartley was a big influence. Max Beckmann was a big influence, especially early.
Great. Leah, any luck?
Oh, she could maybe write it in the chat.
You want to write your comment in the chat, Leah? Anybody else? Anyone? I want to make a comment or have a question for Bobby before we move on. Was the change in brushstroke technique during this period a conscious decision, or did it just happen?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, that's continuing on to this day. At first, when I first started painting, I was using big brushes, and it was really a matter of dexterity and craft, where I don't know what I was trying to do, but I didn't have a lot of experience. So I think the more I painted, the more refined it just sort of naturally became, the more detail I was able to. At the beginning, I used big brushes and I was being bolder, but it was also, I was finishing them as far as I could finish them. But each time I finished a painting, I had more knowledge and more experience, and I was able to take whatever that was to the next one. And that just built and built until now. You'll see as it goes on, they get extremely detailed, and now I'm starting to sort of open that up again.
That was actually Jody's question. Thank you, Jody. Leah, I'm going to hold this question for the next, since it's a more general question, I'm going to hold this until the next Q&A because we need to move into the next round of slides. And so we'll ask this for the next round. Okay. Thank everybody. Thank you, everybody. And if everyone would turn off their videos and their mics, that'd be great. Bobby, take us into the next chapter of your life, won't you?
Sure. So, Oregon, I was around 1999, I had it's a long story, but I ended up buying the house that we rented in Oregon and moving there. As I said, I wasn't sure that I was moving there full time, but that is in fact what happened. And it really was a huge change in my life. I went from having this very active social life in Chicago to much more contemplative time in Oregon. I was alone a lot more. And in Chicago, I would have to finish a painting and take it to my gallery as soon as it was finished so that she would have, something to try to sell. And I was always trying to get more material to her. So in Oregon, it gave me this opportunity to slow down. Ironically, I pretty much stopped painting landscapes when I moved to Oregon, which is odd, but true. And I started I was in a relationship with someone there. I started a relationship with someone there who was an antique dealer, and different kinds of objects came into my life, different kinds of interiors, different kinds of influences and sources came in. And this series of wainscoting, I call them wainscoting paintings, referring to that that molding on the wall, which is called wainscoting. And I created these sort of, I would set up a still life, but I would create these sort of imagined interiors. I was fascinated, and still am, by, I love those dining rooms that are painted with landscapes, the idea of illusion, and then of things hanging on. I was playing with layers where it's like, quote, 3D still life in front of a wall with a painting depicting a three-dimensional or one kind of space, and then hanging a flat image of something that's representing something 3D on top of that. So it's all these metaphysical ideas about space and reality. And this is called Eden. And I took that painting from a detail of a Poussin painting. I also had a lot of light fixtures, this idea of turning on and off the light switch. Anyway, next image. Ooh, dreamy. This is the beginning where I got really fascinated with Hieronymus Bosch, the painter you all probably know. And he did the Garden of Earthly Delights. And I started including these details of the Garden of Earthly Delights by Bosch as if they were painted murals on a wall, and then hanging images. And then this is also I collected old photographs a lot. And again, as in Chicago, making these sort of poetic, symbolic still lifes. Next slide. Here's another one, another detail from that same Bosch painting, same sort of. And I would also develop ideas where I would start with smaller paintings, and then I would have, I would be like, oh, I want to do it and elaborate and make it, and they would sort of get, naturally the scale would grow and the ideas would become more ambitious. Next slide. Also that Tree of Life, I love those Tree of Life wallpapers, so playing with those ideas. And here it's called The Spinster's Secret, and I used one of my old black and white photographs and put her as if her photograph was taken in the room that the painting is hanging. Next slide. And as you see these, like I was saying, in Oregon, I was able to have these paintings around longer. So I was living with them in a different way and developing them, and I was working on them much longer. Like that silver picture, if you get close up into it, it's just like, it's really detailed. And I was thinking about the paintings that I've looked at in the museums in Europe and studied, and trying to emulate these artists that I so admire from other centuries. Next slide. And this painting's called Sea Flowers, and it's a large painting. And this painting to me represents a huge breakthrough where, I mean, all of these paintings, the last painting too, but this one in particular, where I was challenging myself to see how far I could take a painting, how much I could put into it. And this painting was sort of the ultimate of that experiment. The detail, and this was also a setup still life that I had, and you can see it's as if the painting is torn and revealing another painting beneath it. So again, playing with these metaphysical ideas, the wallpaper, there's a seam in the wallpaper, showing that is in fact a painting, and kind of breaking into space reality ideas. Next slide. And this is a large painting, 5 by 5 feet. Again, that's sort of Indian influence, the Indian painting on the wall. And that the paintings hanging on the wall, that one is a painting of my father with his mother, my grandmother, looking out a window. And again, it's as if in that photograph, the painting on the wall is in that painting. So it's playing with these ideas. And I think if you see the woman with her legs, the sort of circus character on the table there, it's like entering through the womb into this realm of garden and birth. And it's all, and in the window, you can see that sort of cut. And you know, I was taking these paintings as far as I could go in terms of representation and painting and craft. And then this space started to break open. Like I made that little cut and it's as if that bird is flying out. But doing these paintings, it pushed me into another level, next slide, where suddenly the space sort of broke open and I started doing these overlapping images where it was no longer in quotes 3D real space. It was a more dream space where images overlapped. And here you can see the woman with the hat, but there's also an octopus, and there's also this landscape of this frozen river, and those tiny figures on the bottom are looking up, sort of either painting or observing the landscape. And this is a part of there was a build up to this, but I ended up doing this series of they're 22 by 16, so they're very large. They're very ambitious. These are colored pencil drawings, and there was this period where I just became obsessed with colored pencils and took it to a kind of extreme. Next slide. And I did a series of 11. I decided to do an actual suite of drawings that were related to each other called sea fashions. So every drawing had a sort of sea creature, but the sea creatures are also like fashion, like their hats, like this, the baby's wearing the hat as an octopus, but it's also sort of drifting in this dream space of the ocean. This one sort of gets you in the stomach, I think. Next slide. And these Disney creatures that are on her hat, but they're also, and the ladybug creates this, what do you call this spot on your forehead? I was also starting yoga at this time, so there was a lot of ideas of the chakras coming in through these. Next slide. This is called Sphinx. And again, here's the Bosch, a detail from Bosch, and another woman from my collection of photographs, and another jellyfish that becomes her sort of, you know, like that kind of Victorian sleeping hat. Next slide. And this one's called Ganesh, where the tail of the crazy cat doll that's overlapping this guy's head sort of becomes a trunk with tusks. Next slide. So I really, I kept pushing. There was a whole period where I was just doing colored pencil for a long time. And they became very worked up. And as you see on all of these, there's a border around like the green edge. That's the paper. So the drawings are on that colored paper. So I would choose a colored paper and then do the drawing on that, and they'd be so worked up. Next slide. This is called Metropolis Madonna. And that little pomegranate on her breast is from a Bosch painting. The Metropolis, you know, that movie Metropolis, I used the robot from Metropolis and overlaid it on a Northern Renaissance Madonna. Next slide. And then I tried to go from because of the colored pencil, which allowed me to do these overlapping images, I tried to transfer that into painting. And I did a few. This is a really large painting called Who Are You?, which has got the Alice in Wonderland caterpillar blowing at his hookah. It says, "Who are you?" sort of backwards. And again, the Hieronymus Bosch, it's from a different painting, the Haywain. And the central figure is from one of my collection of photographs that was starting to disintegrate. So it's sort of breaking through into a night sky through the holes of the disintegrating photograph. I think that's the end of my Oregon paintings.
Wow, how exhilarating to watch, to experience this evolution
Mm.
and just your mastery really coming into the fore. Um, I mean, I know a lot of this work, but it's all obviously, and a lot of this content, but it's so wonderful to watch it and hear you talk about it and to experience other people experiencing it. I
A
want
lot of
to,
things are left out, or they sort of I'm like, some of those colored pencil drawings are all very developed, but I'm leaving out all the development of starting from the beginning and how I got there, you know. But
yeah. I mean, yeah, it's an overview. I want to make sure this was Leah's question from before. She said, is there something that happened that made you realize you were a painter, a specific event or moment?
um, when I was in high school, I was very fortunate to be in a school that really pushed art, and I had a painting teacher who was very important to me, named Miss Collins, and I think she saw something in me, and I had a very close relationship with her. When I left high school, I didn't imagine that I could be a painter. It wasn't something in my sort of cultural idea of what possibilities were for me. So I never considered it until I mentioned I was at Northwestern, and I took these classes as a painter and painting, just because I didn't know what else to do. And I wanted to give, it was like a gift to myself. And this teacher, Ed Paschke, was really the first professional painter that I met who I could see I related to. And he took us to his studio. So I saw his life. I saw where he worked. I saw how he worked, and so that was a major moment for me. And it was during that time that I was taking his class that I had a sort of epiphany where I suddenly realized that I'm going to be a painter. I'm going to go to the Art Institute. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. It really was like a download of information where I realized that that's what I wanted to do. It wasn't out of nowhere. My grandmother was a painter, and I had been painting since I was young, but it was really the realization that that was in the realm of possibility.
That's great. Here's another question. This is from Caroline Kraus. Does the direction of a painting sometimes surprise you, or do they usually end up as you originally envisioned them?
Um, Especially at the beginning, they would often have, yes, they would surprise me. Things would go off in a totally different direction. I had experiences sometimes where I remember one painting where I was so frustrated with it, and I wiped it all down, and then there was this green film over, and you know, and then it would start to reveal other possibilities, and then it would go in a new direction. Um, and yeah, to this day, it develops, and it's the each painting is kind of a conversation. I start it, and then I might have something in my mind, but it reveals itself, and it becomes a kind of conversation between myself and the painting that is slowly revealing itself.
That's great. Does anybody else have a question or a comment? David says, well, that only makes sense because they certainly surprise us. Each painting is a kind of conversation. Perfect. I love that too. Anyone else have a comment or a question for Bobby? My question, says Susan, is can you define what it was when you started pushing yourself after you moved to Oregon?
Well, I think it was just when I had that pressure in Chicago of delivering paintings that not that I wasn't taking them as far. I don't know if I was taking them quite as far as I could go all the time. I felt it's sort of like, well, I got to get work in there. And when I got into Oregon, it's like, I want to see what I'm capable of. And I have time, and I have nobody's watching me for the first time. And I could just sort of be in my private space and investigate and see how far I could go. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's in a way, it's like it felt almost athletic, like endurance.
She said, yes, thank you. That was Susan Dallion. Um, uh, let's, Alec, I'm going to wait and ask Alec's question in the next round because we should stay on top of our time. But before we go back to the slides, I just want to mention to everyone, if you'd like to throw Bobby some cash if you didn't have a chance to either buy a ticket or if you're feeling inspired, his Venmo is on this slide that Karen will share with you, and we'll post it in the chat as well. One of the intentions behind these salons is to support artists within our community and provide them an opportunity to connect with audience. So thank you so much for being a part of that. Okay, thank you, Karen, so much for sharing that. And Bobby, you ready to go on to the next chapter of your life?
I am.
Great.
So when I turned 40, I left Oregon, and I didn't know where I was going. I started an adventure. My niece and nephew, Alec and Lucy, drove with me as I moved from Oregon to Atlanta, where my sister, their mother lives. And it ended up being a really important year, A, that I was around family, and B, my nephew Alec helped me sort of create a website for the first time. And I took the 20 years and organized them and saw for the first time that I was working in these categories. It had all seemed more random and then until I made the website and I started to make sense of what I'd done. And I think that year of reflection and making the website allowed me to go forward. And I met Chris. That's the major thing that happened. And then I moved to be with him in New York. And I had never really intended to live in New York, even though I'd spent a lot of time there. I think I was intimidated by it a little bit. And I had also discovered in Oregon how much I really love the country. And when I moved from Oregon, I thought, oh, I'll go to the East Coast and I'll find something similar, something close to a big city that, but is more natural in the country. But anyway, I ended up in New York, and I was like, okay, well, I'm here. And I can see immediately how, well, one of the things that happened is that when Chris and I first met, we drove back and forth from LA to New York about 4 times. We went through every state practically. And we did a lot of junking along the way. And it was the beginning of digital cameras for me. And I had collected so much in my life. And this digital camera gave me the opportunity to collect without amassing physical objects for the first time. So I would take pictures, and I started to discover that I was attracted to these dolls and toys that were left behind in the junk stores. And when I did start painting again in my transition back to New York, I started painting these dolls. Here's one. Next slide. I loved their crazy hair, and as you can see, and I see now, like moving to New York, I was leaving the natural world and moving to a sort of artificial world where I was surrounded by advertising and the color that comes with print advertising. And so I see that my color changed and my source materials changed. And next slide. I started this whole series of doll and you can go back. Yeah. This is a crazy cat doll that I actually had. It was a physical object that I had. And I still have. Next slide. But they still have, and I was also like playing with pop source material, but like this, I was sort of making an homage to like the grand portrait painters, like Sargent, making this painting is like 6 feet tall, and it's monumental, but it's the the kind of doll that people had for toilet paper covers. So it's playing with this idea of kitsch and pop, but also referencing sort of monumental figure painting. Next slide. Again, this one is a really monumental, large painting, but the subject matter are these little gold painted figurines with glass emerald eyes that I saw in a junk store in Ohio. Next slide. And again, I went back to the colored pencil drawings, but this time they had a whole different feeling. This is a bunny baby. I always felt like she's sort of holding her, like it's a bunny mother holding her baby, question mark. Next slide. Sad puppy. And again, the border is the color of the paper. Next slide. And of course, Bob's big boy. Next slide. These are all the same scale. And so it was when I was in New York, I was painting, I was trying to sort of figure out the art world and my place in it. Always feeling conflicted about that, always feeling conflicted about the gallery world. And I was trying to figure out how to make money, and I had this idea of going on Prince Street and selling prints. I made prints of a lot of my work, and I got a table, and I started getting on the subway and going downtown to Soho and setting up a table and selling prints, just as a way of kind of creating my own way, my own path, instead of going the gallery way. I just thought this sounded interesting, and I learned a lot. And one of the things that happened at the end of my few months of doing this is that a man who had a branding company ended up buying a painting. He bought a print, and then he asked if the painting was available, and I said yes, and he put it in his office, and it was fabulous. And then he asked if I could paint his dog in a similar style. So I did, and this is my first dog portrait. His name is Smudge, and you see the sort of carryover of the pop, as in the dolls, that sort of pop background. I did it with this dog, and then someone else asked me to do it, and then someone else. Next slide. And that was the birth of, there's Smudge looking at his portrait. And this is one of my very early dog portraits. And as a lot of you know, that's become a sort of signature bread and butter thing that I do. I realized that there was a demand for them, and people were interested in me doing them. And I was trying to figure out my way in terms of making money. And I thought I would try to kind of take the dog portrait, which we see so much, and elevate it to a new level. Next slide. But in the meantime, I'm still creating my own. This is called Classy Picture. I took a sort of images from the yearbook and combined them. Next slide. And so now I moved to my studio in Bushwick, and I am I'm in a group of studios with other artists, and I got into this program called AIM, which is at the Bronx Museum, where they select up and coming artists and try to teach them how to enter the big kids art world. And these are the images that I was making at that time. Again, sort of going back a little bit to the surrealism of earlier, but in a new flavor with a pop culture and pop images. But Candyland and 60s. Next slide. Combining in my own flavor of. This is an image where I was playing with the word and just taking it to the over the top. And also in this whole group of paintings, I think I was starting to go to therapy, and I was starting to really explore my own sexuality in a way, and in terms of expressing it in my work. And so this is an image from that period. Next slide. Speaking of like unconscious, this is, I had images that I collect, photographs, things I'm attracted to, putting things together, and it was sort of intuitive. But now I look at this painting and I totally see it as the beginning of therapy, where it's like the large woman on the right is my therapist, and that both the figures on the left are me learning to love myself. Next slide. And this is a large painting I did specifically for the show that we had at the Bronx Museum for that AIM program. It's called Right, and it's 7 feet by 5 feet. It's really large. Next slide. And this is the last of that group, called Totem. Let me see. I think that's, yeah, that was the last of that series. And, I would collect, I was doing sort of symmetry with Candyland, and the face of this is from a Nebraska football coach. And then I put Dolly Parton's hair and then a sort of Japanese anime into this confetti crazy image. Is that the last? Next slide. Yeah. So that was New York.
Wow. What an incredible journey. Amazing, Bobby. It's just so exciting. We've got a bunch of questions. I know, Ragobir, I hadn't seen that you wanted to ask a question. Hi there.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to say I'm so blown away, and I'm just so grateful for how generous you're being by showing your work. I'm very rarely speechless, and I'm kind of speechless by just how powerful your work is, and to listen to you talk about it. I'm so grateful just to be able to sit here and look at your work and hear your story. I'm even a bigger fan than I was already. Now I'm like a supersonic fan. I just can't stop writing in the chat room, because every painting I just like, I have to write something. So thank you so much. I'll give somebody else a chance.
Thanks, Rob. Nice to see your face.
So glad you're here. Thank you.
Beautiful work. Beautiful work.
Thank you.
Alec had a question from the previous section, which was, are there, quote, Easter eggs in some of the paintings that only you know about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, definitely. I can see parts of my life that were revealed that I didn't know I was revealing to myself. And, there are little secrets, and especially in the earlier work, I think that my life was much more hidden and dealing with secrets. My personal life was different, and I was very interested in obfuscation. And I can see, like in those New York paintings, how things became much more just on the surface, and they continue to be, my life becomes more of an open book, and that becomes more so in my work as well.
So great. I mean, it is wonderful watching that evolution, like so many of the layers, like you were so into layers and covering up and obfuscation, as you said. And then what we're watching is you reveal more of yourself, right? Like breaking through and onto the other side, or through to the other side, and becoming more and more revealed for who you really are. Helen had a question also. How did not having to create for a gallery affect your creativity?
Oh, it was huge. It was really life-changing. Moving to I lived just a block away from the beach in Oregon and the northern coast, and I was about 10 minutes from the most beautiful state park that you can imagine, rocky coast, and just the shift away from public to private meant everything. And again, as I've said, like having the paintings stick around, like they became more internal and more personal in a way. I think they were always personal, but I had I had a different relationship with them there. I was also the beginning, like Dennis Adrian, who was my teacher, was such an influence, and I had so much people, my dealer and my friends and my world sort of observing. And so I think being by myself allowed me to try things and experiment and move into new territories.
John Lucy says it's interesting. Hi, John Lucy, that you didn't do landscapes when you actually lived there, Oregon.
I know. I think all those years of painting in the landscape, painting outside was such a great experience, but there's a lot that goes with it. You know, there's bugs and there's wind and there's weather and there's people, and all that was really wonderful to learn. But when it came down to it, when I moved to Oregon and I had a good amount of studio space and I was able to do large pictures, and I realized, which is my practice to the day, what I really want to do is just be in my studio with my earbuds and my music and my lunch.
That's Bobby. I also like to think that you needed the landscapes when you lived in Oregon.
Yeah.
Right. And then when you lived
there, I just had it.
Oh, well, now I'm here. It's almost like you conjured your life there, right?
Yeah, the landscape was just part of my daily life. So it wasn't like I'm coming from Chicago and I need to just absorb this so I can take it home. It's like, this is now my life. I can just live with it. And then I was free, in a way, free of it, like free of that to explore new subject matter.
People are really responding to your idea of just wanting to be in your studio with earbuds, music, and lunch. I think we get a ring that bell on that one. Anybody have one last question or comment before we move to the next section? Okay, without any further ado, Bobby Lucy, take us to Woodstock.
Okay, so, again, all of my moves have always felt like I'm not really moving there, but Chris and I, that's a long story, but Chris and I ended up moving here where I am now. We're now at the present moment. We moved to Birdcliff, which is an art colony in Woodstock, started in 1902. And as I was saying earlier, when I moved from Oregon, I thought I was going to move to Asheville, North Carolina. I wanted to move somewhere that was in a place of natural beauty, but I wanted to be near. I didn't know where I was going. And then we moved to Woodstock through a series of unexpected turns. And after a while, I realized, oh, I'm here. Like, this is where I was going. We had to have this pit stop in New York where we created the Secret City and I lived for 7 years. Chris had been there a few years before I met him. And then we moved to Woodstock and I found my kind of haven, what I was looking for. The fact that we're 2 hours from New York City, and when it's non-COVID, I can take a bus in and go to the Met and see shows and go to galleries, but I can also get on the bus home and be in the country, in the woods where I am now. So this first slide is called Cindy's Child, and it's Cindy Brady. I saw this picture of her from Tiger Beat magazine when she was probably like 16 or 17. And you know, I had grown up watching the Brady Bunch, and then I made this sort of like child Cindy coming out of her head, like being born from a goddess. And this is the reality is that when I moved to Woodstock, I was already deeply into my portrait phase of really focusing on commissions. And this was a return to a kind of continuation of the things of the past, playing with pattern, playing with pop imagery. This is a large scale. Next slide, please. But what I was really doing was developing these commissioned portraits. Here's a kitty cat. And the backgrounds kept developing and becoming more of my own thing. And they became, the backgrounds became something I really have continued to enjoy playing with abstraction, playing with pattern, playing with color. I also realized how much I love animals and have always loved animals, but haven't really had a lot of consciousness around it. It's just been something that's so much a part of me that I didn't really think about it. And it's been a joy to bring that love of animals to these portraits. Next slide. So I painted like dozens and dozens and my style has really evolved. These portraits have become very much my own. I like to do these sort of central, symmetrical, and I like the idea of really connecting with the animal through their gaze and the directness. Next slide. And I do people too. So I've sort of ended up modeling my career on earlier painters that I admired from other centuries, you know, from the Renaissance, before that, Renaissance on, where artists really sold from their studio, and they had all sorts of things that they were doing, landscapes and still lifes and portraits and paintings from their imagination. And that's sort of how I've been. And this is a large scale portrait of a young girl from New York City. Next slide. And so all these things are sort of happening simultaneously. And I decided I was doing so many portraits, and I was doing almost exclusively portraits. And then I realized something was missing in my life and something in my creative life. And I needed to go back and keep that thing going, which was paintings from my imagination. And I decided, I had this vision of, I had done that Cindy Brady painting, but then I thought of doing a series of paintings of 70s TV icons of the people that I grew up watching on television as a child, and sort of turning them into icons. Icons are like subjects of religious the religious gaze, you know, and again, like that painting I was saying, pushing it to the limit of like pushing these and painting them so intensely that they sort of resonate with energy and sort of archetypal. So this painting is called Mother. You know, Carol Brady played the mother in the Brady Bunch, but I thought it was interesting to sort of take it beyond her role as a 70s TV star and push it into a sort of more galactic Earth Mother or whatever. Next slide. And with, you know, and I decided to focus on the idea of the feminine with these paintings. It's been such a subject, you know, the age of Aquarius is upon us, and I really wanted to celebrate the feminine energy and all the different aspects of it. So this painting of Caitlyn Jenner as her former 70s self was part of that exploration of femininity in a sort of complicated way. But here I'm playing with these patterns where there's a pattern in the background and then the pattern of the jacket and the pattern of and playing with flat patterns, and then these very, like back to those doll paintings where I would have a flat background and then have the face, and then I would really model the face so that that contrast between the 2D and the 3D becomes kind of trippy. And I'm also using silver paint in every one of these, so it's hard to tell from this slide, but that's those light images are actually reflective silver paint. Next slide. And then this is this is 5 by 4 feet, and you all probably know the Charlie's Angels. It's just called Angels, but playing with, again, that 3D, 2D pattern. I had a dream of making like 8 or 10 of these and having a show of them, but they've kind of gotten pushed to the side a bit lately. But I had an opportunity to show these in St. Louis last year, which was a real thrill, and see them in a beautiful gallery and well lit and from a distance. And again, playing with these bigger ideas like a John Singer Sargent of 3 Sisters, or, you know, but playing with this pop idea of that. Thanks. Next slide. And, you know, as I said, I was sort of over painting outside, but I was here living in Woodstock, and I take my walk every day at 3, and I just contemplate nature and have this beautiful relationship with the woods here and with our landscape. And so I finally decided years in to try to approach landscape again, because I hadn't really done landscape for years. I hadn't done anything through my years in New York, and I hadn't done anything really since I moved to Oregon. So I decided to reinvestigate and see if I could make paintings from my own sources, from photographic sources. And this is a painting of a very special place in my walk that I was always attracted to. And this was my sort of return to landscape in a large scale painting. This is 4 by 3 feet. And it was really intense and a fascinating journey to paint. Next slide. I started this painting around the same time. This is, again, is a horizontal version of that 3 by 4 foot scale. And all the paintings have a sort of, this painting is very personal because when Chris and I got married, our friends, the Goldmans, let us stay in their house in Cape Cod for our honeymoon. And our whole wedding was such a journey, and it was such a beautiful, beautiful moment. And to leave the wedding and have this haven to go to, and we walked outside of our home and the house where we were staying in a afternoon after we got there, and it was this vision that I saw of this place, and this became this painting. Next slide. And this is the first time I think this is one of the first autumn paintings that I've done. This is from an image from my birthday several years ago on a walk that we took with Sally into Camo, which is a walk we do here in our town of Woodstock. And I was really just trying to capture that thing of fall here is just so extraordinary. We moved here at the beginning of October, and every fall I just fall in love with this place again because it's so extraordinarily beautiful, and there's so much color in the trees, and when the light is shining through them, it's just one of the most, and I love October. It's my birthday month, and that sort of raking light and that special clarity that happens, and I was trying to capture that in this painting. Next slide. And so Alec, who's here, when he moved here about 3 years ago and had the idea that I should do a monthly photograph. And so we started doing these monthly photographs. At first, we would do them at different locations outside and locations around town and try to find backgrounds that suited the painting. And then we switched over to, I started making these backdrops that matched the backgrounds of the paintings, so that I would stand in front of the backdrop and then hold the painting. So I do that at the first of every month, and I've done that for now 3 years. And then Alec has designed calendars. We're going to have a calendar this year. He's in the process of starting to design right now, hopefully to have it out for Christmas and the holiday season. But it's been a really fun project to every month to come up with a new photograph and a new design, and then I dress to match it, and just a way to stay in touch with my community. Next slide. Caroline Krause, you're here. This is for you. This is her sweet dog, Henry. So many of my commissions have been from old friends. Caroline's a friend of mine from Burroughs in St. Louis, and this is her dog, who has an incredible, her dear friend, who's a big part of her life project of talking about animals and how we use them. And she's made a documentary that you all need to watch. But as you see, my style of like with everything else that gets more involved, I get more detailed and more, it grows and it changes. Next slide. So much of my Woodstock life has been painting portraits, and it's been a beautiful thing to work with people. And I've really felt like so much, as you see, so much of my earlier work was exploring my own unconscious and my own ideas about art. And when I first started taking commissions, I had a sort of attitude about it and about the paintings I saw, the commissions of other people's commissions. But as it's grown, it's really become this beautiful thing of a way of sort of being of service, of offering up my craft and collaborating with people who would like to see a portrait of their dog or their child or their favorite landscape. Next slide. This is a portrait I did of another friend from my early years. This is a portrait of my friend Lisa and her son. Next slide. And as they go on, they also get more ambitious, and you know, I feel proud of these. There's a lot of dog portraits out in the world, but it's been a privilege to have this opportunity to really develop my own style and have my own mark on dog painting. And it was not really my intention, but it's been a real pleasure. And every one of these dogs has such a personality, and to create backgrounds that sort of complement them and to try to draw out their own specific idiosyncratic selves. Next slide. This is Max, the Bracco Italiano, and I had the honor of getting the best in show at the Museum of the Dog in New York City. They were having a competition for dog portraits, and this one won the best in show. Next slide. So now I'm in Oregon, and I'm in my little studio upstairs, and I'm starting to do different kinds of work. And I can see now, like, things, this is a recent painting from this year called The Door, but I see how this also connects to that group of paintings called Wainscoting that I was doing in Oregon. So these things just keep weaving through my creative life, ideas and sources. Next slide. This is another a landscape that's been a really productive year. COVID has actually, the idea of not going places and staying here, I think I've had my most productive year that I've ever had. This is a landscape that I did called Primrose Creek. Next slide. So I started doing something that happened this year is I decided to try to sort of break it open. It sort of happened where I had this idea of trying to make a painting a week and I bought these panels. They're gessoed panels as opposed to oil on canvas. These are on panels. It's a different surface, and something sort of developed in my painting in response to this surface that allows me to be more spontaneous and sort of looser. And so I started these in a series of landscapes, but then I've also started doing animal portraits and portraits. And this is one portrait that I did on panel. You might be able to see the difference, but next slide. This is another portrait dog portrait on panel. Next slide. He had one eye like our Ruby. And so with COVID, Chris started the Daily Show, showing every day at noon Eastern time. He has a half-hour show that's a sort of smaller version of a new live version, daily version of The Secret City. And he always shows an object, reads a poem, tells a story. We have sort of a community and social thing. And on Fridays, I make a guest appearance. And so it's been fun to create a painting a week. And then on Friday, I get to share it with this Secret City community. And this is one of those paintings, it's a cone flower and a bee. Again, this is one of the panels. This is a little bit larger panel of Big Sur. And the nice thing about these panels is that they're a little bit less time, they're less time intensive than my oil on canvases, like the landscapes that you saw earlier in this section. So because they're a little bit looser and thinner, I'm able to make more images and I can just be more spontaneous. And if I have an idea, I can just do it and it doesn't end up taking 6 months. Next slide. Rose of Sharon. I've been doing a lot of flowers and little landscapes, things that pop up. I see something that I'm attracted to. This is from our friend Kelly. I don't know if she's here. Her incredible garden. I got a lot of source material from Kelly's garden this summer. Next slide. This is actually an oil on canvas painting that I did I had done an oil on panel sort of smaller version as a study for this, and then I did a more worked up, this is the more worked up oil on canvas painting, 20 by 20 that I did of the Thorn Preserve where Chris and Sally and I walk. And this felt new, like just this moody time of day. I'm really interested in this sort of misty world. And I think one of the things that's happened, and you can see in these past few paintings and this year, is with COVID, and because of our political situation for the last 4 years, it's just felt so hard and traumatizing. Just the daily onslaught of the political thing that we're going through has felt so harsh and kind of mean. And I've really felt a desire to bring peaceful images into the world. Like I feel like that feels like my responsibility now. That's like the thing that I can offer the world, is something that feels peaceful and timeless and hopefully can take us even for a moment away from that obsession or onslaught of hard news and remind us that we are part of the earth and part of something eternal and timeless. Next slide. So it's been having these panel paintings has been just a really beautiful opportunity for me to they're like little short stories. They're, you know, a little study of a flower, or just something that catches my eye. This is a white peony from Kelly's garden again. Next slide. This is a friend's house, a source that I saw she had taken of her house in Maine, and I was really drawn to the image, and I ended up doing an even larger version, a 3 by 3 foot painting of this. But there's something about this image that sort of reminds me of Hopper. It has a kind of moodiness to it. I've always been drawn to looking in people's houses at twilight when the lights go on and you can sort of see inside, and then that reflected window where you can't see inside. So there's something, I love images where there's something poetic and something mysterious. I think that I've always been attracted to that, to mystery, and to, I like images that allow for, that allow for someone to bring something to it, where, and there's something you can't quite put your finger on. Next slide. This is a painting I did for a friend of her, a favorite spot in Martha's Vineyard. And I got the opportunity. I was really thinking a lot about Van Gogh and this painting and mark making, and just painting landscapes this year is really, it's changing. I can feel myself, my painting changing, and my mark making changing, and my color changing, developing, I guess. Next slide. And this is a painting I just finished, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. Someone commissioned me to do some paintings for her bedroom, and I thought I would do these daffodils that, so this painting feels kind of epic. It feels like there's something about the point of view, the perspective of sort of being in the daffodils and looking up at them through their petals and seeing the sun shining through, but also that, I don't know, that's all, it's so dynamic with all those overlapping leaves, and it was really fun to do. And again, what I was saying is I think that these are the images that I'm making right now. I'm drawn to landscape and flowers, and making images that are full of peace and love. That's it.
Wow, 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 wow. Oh my God, that's so fun.
That was a lot.
It's so great, Bobby. I wrote down some of the questions that haven't been, that sort of scrolled by. If people still have more questions or comments, feel free to either raise your hand or turn your camera on. I'll ask Bobby the questions I wrote down. If you just want to hang out with us while Bobby fields these questions, we're just gonna stay a little longer. Oh, and I also want to say this has been recorded and we can share it with you all. It's going to be a really beautiful document and a record of just a beautiful presentation, Bobby. So we will we'll let you all know how you can watch it or, you know, see it again. So yes, Kelly is definitely here. I just wanted to address that. You said, I don't know if she's here. Kelly's definitely here. John said, how do you make the backgrounds?
Well, with the animals, I sort of look at the animal and I put that on the canvas or the panel, and then I'm often responding to the animal itself and the composition. So I'm trying to create backgrounds that enhance the animal in the best way. Sometimes I respond to the color of the animal or try to make the color pattern combinations that will kind of make that particular portrait come alive. And those sometimes change over and over and over in a single painting.
Here's another question. Elizabeth asked this the last session. You mentioned your experience with your first digital camera. From then on, how did photography even Instagram interface with your progression as a painter?
Well, it's actually been a longer relationship than that. When I first started painting in Chicago, as I said, I was collecting postcards and old photographs, and sometimes I would put a photograph in the still life. So I was painting a painting of the photograph. And so photography has always been sort of interwoven with my painting, even before I was using it in such a sort of blatant use. And definitely Instagram has had a huge influence. The square format, you notice that I'm making squares all the time now. That has become my sort of preferred, and that's probably a response to seeing squares on Instagram all the time. Yeah, the digital photograph, that transition just allowed me to capture things. You know, I always have a camera in my pocket, so I'm outside and I see the light, you know, pouring through a flower, and I have my camera there, and I can keep that image and I can use that as a source material.
A couple more questions, and people are sharing really beautiful comments in the chat. We'll make sure to save the chat so you can read it all. Bobby, really beautiful thoughts and insights and comments. Jessica asked, do you meet the pups?
Unfortunately, I don't meet most of them. I have a chance to meet some of them, but a lot of my commissions come from other places. So if I can, I do. But I feel like I actually get to know each one of them just through spending time with them, looking at them. I think there's a lot that you can get just through a photographic source. And then not just the photographic source, but connecting through the painting and the process.
So Jill asked, are they wood panels?
Yeah, I think they're masonite, maybe on a wooden structure, and then gesso. And the gesso is very dry. There's something about when I apply thin, very turpentine oil paint onto it, it absorbs very quickly, and then it creates this almost pastel-like effect when it dries, which I really I enjoy.
And then Wendy just asked, what kind, oh my God, this is going to be a whole thing. What kind of music do you listen to while you paint?
Well, Alec, my nephew, is here, and he's sort of my music curator. He's been a huge influence ever from CDs, and now it's gone digital, and he often makes a monthly playlist, and that's a big chunk of what I listen to is his sort of curated. So I get introduced to a lot of new music there, you know, and I listen to Spotify. I go off on new artists sometimes. This last month, because of Leah and Jeremy and the Secret City a couple months ago, I've been stuck on this Nick Drake thing where I'm just listening to Nick Drake a lot. It's just occasionally I'll listen to a podcast, but I tend to listen to podcasts when I'm on my walk or something. When I'm painting, I really like the abstraction of music that allows me to kind of get into my painting zone and be in that sort of dream place. So I listen to contemporary music. I listen to electronic music. It's sort of all over the board.
One more question. Jill asked this, is Bobby a really patient and detail-focused person in general? Some of these landscapes are so amazingly detailed. I imagine they take a lot of focus and patience. I love that.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit of Rain Man going on. There's probably a little Asperger's running through the family a little bit. My dad was in the military and very disciplined, and I think I inherited that from him, but I'm very structured in my life. I work a certain amount every day. I sit down and I kind of drop in and start, like, even, you know, in Chicago, these paintings have developed more and more and more where some of those paintings I worked on for, like, especially some of those Oregon paintings, I spent 6 months just on that one painting every day. And so, yeah, there's a lot of focus and detail. Crazy sometimes.
Yeah, Bobby's incredibly disciplined, and I'll admit that it was meeting Bobby changed my life in many, many, many incredible ways. One of the ways was seeing his artistic practice helped me create a different kind of artistic practice for myself. I had always been in the theater, and I always relied on a job that I went to and then was told what to do. But seeing Bobby's studio practice taught me that I could create my own at-home creative practice. So his discipline and his ability to structure his time is really incredible. Well, are there any more questions, any more thoughts or comments? I want to remind folks, if you want to visit Bobby's Venmo or throw him some cash, the Venmo address is in the chat. And thank you all so very much for being here for this incredible evening. Bobby, what an extraordinary presentation, and sharing your life and your work with all of us and your beautiful insights. Special thanks to Karen Schleifer for putting such a beautiful show together, taking the source material and making it look so fabulous. I want to remind people that we will be live tomorrow on Facebook, and my special guest, I'm just going to tell you all this, nobody else knows. My special guest tomorrow will be Bobby Lucy. It's Friday, and he has a new painting to share with us tomorrow. So join us on Facebook or Instagram at 12 p.m. Eastern for the Secret City Daily. Really wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for coming. It was such a pleasure. I'm sorry I went overtime. I see it's much later than I thought, but.
Oh, it was delicious. I don't think anybody minded. Thanks so much, y'all. If you want to stick around for a minute or two, you can turn your cameras on. Oh my God, look, it's people. It's friends.
Yay.
You want to say hi? Hi. Hi, Raquel. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
So glad you came. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Leah, Elizabeth. Laurel Mead is here. Helen Churko. Hi there. Hi, Jill. Hi, Lauren Nave. Hi, Jessica and Graciela. Hi, Diane and Susan and Wendy. Oh my God. Hi, Jess. It's so great to see everybody's faces. Oh my God. Hi, Joe Carroll. Welcome. So glad you were here. Hi, Wendy. Oh my God. Hi, y'all.
Nice to see your faces, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Bobby. It was amazing.
Oh.
Eric, it's so long.
Oh yes, it is my dear niece Elizabeth Wells. She's here live in person.
Hey.
She's like a celebrity.
Don't forget,
somebody's asking, hey, Bobby, how do you find Alex playlists? Are they on Spotify? Are they available?
Yeah, I should post that. I'm not very smart about the sort of social aspect of Spotify, but you could get onto my Spotify, which is and share things there. I think it's just I mean, his Spotify is Future Human, and so you could get things there. But if you go to Robert Lucy, I think you could follow me and then follow my playlists.
Yes, I didn't mean to overlook our other niece, Eric. Our other and we're so glad you're here. You're all our nieces. We love all of you. Thank you so much. Gosh, it's so nice to see people's faces, all of your faces.
Nice to be together and have friends from California and all over the country here together at one time. I wish we could hang out in physical world.
We will. We have plans. When this is all over, we're going to have a big retreat in Woodstock.